Okay, we went through our top 24 Dynasty running back rankings. Time to do the same thing at the wide receiver position. I know on Keep Trade Cut, there are players skyrocketing up and down their rankings. Ours aren't going as rapid. I'm not having Treylon Burks fall, 15 spots over a couple months based on nothing. But we do have movement, and I am going to be excited to update y'all. Before we get into it, go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, and leave a comment letting me know how stupid my rankings are. And of course, I do have to let y'all know our 2022 Fantasy Football Draft Guide is now live over there on flockfantasy.com. If you have not gotten your hands on our draft guide yet, fix your life. Go over to flockfantasy.com. Use promo code FLOCK on any purchase for an exclusive discount before the season starts. And when you look at that draft guide, I promise you, you are going to be blown away. I mean, we have 3 raving reviews on the website right now. Thomas, can you please throw them up on the screen? But let's go ahead. Let's dive into these rankings. Let's start it off. Wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. Do I have to say anything? Like, what I can do is I guess I can head over to our draft guide just to maybe list off a few statistics and try to convince you, oh yeah, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, these are valuable players. These are guys that are very, very, very young, hyper efficient, and are only going to get better as they age. I'm not even going to look at our draft guide. Chase 1, Jefferson 2. If we're on underdog, if we're drafting a redraft team, I'm going to go Jefferson 1, Chase 2, but assuming Dynasty, because you have Chase tied up with Burrow for the long term, I am more excited about that connection compared to what we have with long-term Kirk Cousins. And then after that, God knows what for Jefferson. So like I said, redraft, I'm going to go Jefferson. Dynasty, we're going to go Chase. Now let's move on to our second tier. We got Cooper Kupp at 3. Now with Cooper Kupp, he's fallen outside the top 3 according to Keep Trade Cut. I don't get it. This is a wide receiver that, if you pull up the statistics from last year, it seems fake. It seems like you literally went to Madden. You decided to take over a franchise. You decided to play every single game. So you put up video game numbers, or you created your own player. You decided to move the sliders over to 99, 99, 99. And even if that were to happen, and even if you were to simulate an entire season of Madden, does that wide receiver get to 1,900 receiving yards, 145 receptions, and 16 receiving touchdowns, leading the NFL in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns? Now, yes, he's a lot older than those 2017 players. He stayed so long in college because he did go to a small school, obviously. But still, Cooper Kupp, we're going to have at 3. Now, I will say drafting Kupp in a startup's a little bit awkward because you take Kupp, and then after that, your draft is kind of filled out for you in terms of you having to go with a contending team and not being able to rebuild. But a wide receiver that's also going to be in this tier that you can decide to take early, and you can go into a contending team or a rebuilding team, depending on how the value falls to you a little bit later on. CeeDee Lamb. With CeeDee Lamb, I understand. We look at our draft guide. This is a wide receiver that over the past 2 seasons, I will admit it, he has disappointed drafters. With CeeDee Lamb, he was the wide receiver 16 last season on a points per game basis, despite the Dallas Cowboys being the first team in the NFL in points scored. Now, if you head over to Underdog Fantasy right now, redraft players that know what they are doing, where every single league is real money up for grabs. No mock drafts in that ADP. You have to be over 18 on Underdog as well. They're already drafting CeeDee Lamb as the wide receiver 6. They're already projecting CeeDee Lamb to take that elite level up. And it makes sense because Dallas is number 1 over the past 3 years in pace of play in game neutral environments, as well as being a top 5 team in pass to run ratio in game neutral environments. And the reason why CeeDee Lamb was a mid-wide receiver 2 last year, despite the Dallas Cowboys being number 1 in the NFL in points scored, wasn't due to anything with CeeDee Lamb's talent. It was due to how diversified this target tree was. You had, obviously, 20% of the team target share going to CeeDee Lamb. He was the wide receiver 1. Then you had some going to Amari, some going to Michael Gallup, some going to Cedric Wilson. Then beyond that, obviously, you had Dalton Schultz being a top 5 tight end. You have Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard both drawing targets out of the backfield. So it was so spread out that you didn't have that elite top 10 wide receiver breakout for CeeDee Lamb. But now Amari's gone. Now Cedric Wilson's gone. Michael Gallup should miss the beginning portion of the year. Gallup actually tore his ACL after Chris Godwin did. So CeeDee Lamb stepping into the perfect situation. Redraft drafters are willing to take him automatically here, even though he's younger than Kenny Pickett, ahead of very capable receivers like Deebo Samuel at the 1-2 turn. And of course, if you were not drafting on Underdog Fantasy, go fix your life. Go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK when you sign up and they'll match your deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You will get our 2022 Fantasy Football Draft Guide with literally just a $10 deposit on Underdog Fantasy. Most importantly, you can have some fun in some fantasy football drafts. Draft against us in the live stream. Draft in the public lobby. Go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK. But let's move on. Let's go down to our next tier. T. Higgins at 5. With T. Higgins, yes, I know this is aggressive. This is a wide receiver that is never going to be the wide receiver 1 in his own offense. We can admit he's never going to happen. Yes, he did lead this team in target share on a per game basis last year, which is surprising to most people, but he also led this team in air yards per game. Now, of course, that is not going to continue to happen. Jamar Chase should be number 1 in Cincinnati in both those categories, but he was the wide receiver 12 on a per game basis, even though Jamar Chase put up that top 5 finish last year. Cincinnati's only getting better. I think they actually pushed the pace of play with the upgraded offensive line this season. Hell, I'm very excited about drafting T. Higgins in redraft, and in Dynasty is such a stable asset going forward. I'll have T. Higgins at 5. I'll have Jalen Waddle at 6. Heading over to our 2022 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Obviously, if you've been watching the redraft channel, you're tired of me talking about this. You're tired of me telling you this stat about Jalen Waddle, but I have to bring it up. If we look at Jalen Waddle's rookie season, while yes, it's going to be a worse situation going forward with Tyreek Hill coming over. But if we look at wide receivers that average 7.7 targets per game and 63 receiving yards per game their rookie year, Odell, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Julio Jones, AJ Green, Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, Jalen Waddle. That is the caliber of a receiver talent that Waddle is. It makes sense why the Miami Dolphins decided to pick 13 and a future first to move up to select Jalen Waddle at pick 6. Waddle's been dealing with Tua Tagovailoa for a long time. He already knows how bad the quarterback play is. He's already being successful with it. He was the wide receiver 13 on a per game basis as a rookie. Redraft, can't rank him here. Dynasty in the long term, hell yes. Now, our next wide receiver in this tier, we are going to have Deebo Samuel at 7. With Deebo Samuel, wide receiver 3 on a points per game basis. A wide receiver that's still on his rookie deal, drafted in 2019. So you'd imagine, oh, he's only getting better. My issue is he had 8 rushing touchdowns last year. The season was an outlier. If you look at his entire career, you have Trey Lance coming over. Trey Lance is not going to let Deebo Samuel have 8 rushing touchdowns. Also, I think that Trey Lance isn't going to check the ball down nearly as often as what we had from an immobile quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo. So I think the quarterback change, while y'all know I am the number 1 fan of Trey Lance in the world, I'm not going to go out and say it helps Deebo Samuel. Now, wide receiver 8 in this same tier, we are going to have A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, simply one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL. If we go ahead and if we look at A.J. Brown's yards per route run, he is sitting there at 2.73 yards per route run over the past 3 years. If we look at the only wide receivers to be able to be close to this mark over the past 3 years, you have A.J. Brown, Davante Adams, Justin Jefferson. Going over to Philadelphia, going to be another low volume passing attack. However, he has more target competition with Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert than he's ever seen before. So, of course, that's not a great sign for A.J. Brown, but he's young, just signed that massive contract extension. Hopefully, Jalen Hurts takes a step forward as a passer. Now, getting too excited about it. In Dynasty, we're betting on the talent here with A.J. Brown at 8. Now, dropping down a tier, let's go over to some contending pieces. We got Stephon Diggs at 9, Davante Adams at 10, Tyreek Hill at 11. All these players are guys that you're going to take for a win-now team that needs points in the lineup immediately. None of these players will be ranked this high 12 months from now. Kind of know what you're drafting. You're almost just looking at it from a redraft perspective when you take these guys. And from a redraft perspective, Stephon Diggs goes over these guys every single time. Stephon Diggs, obviously in a great situation in Buffalo. He has the best quarterback play out of this trio, and also the least amount of competition for targets. He is the best quarterback, the lowest amount of competition, where you have Davante Adams dealing with both Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller. You have Tyreek Hill dealing with both Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki. There's Stephon Diggs, as Gabriel Davis. You're not going to find Gabriel Davis in these top 24 wide receiver rankings. I apologize, but I'm not a massive fan of Gabriel Davis. And Dynasty, price point worth it. Redraft, it's gone crazy. Now, let's go down to our next tier. Let's go over to wide receiver 12. Someone that just moved up, DJ Moore. Here with DJ Moore, obviously the move is because of Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield coming over. We've said this on the redraft channel, but I promise you guys, Baker Mayfield is the best quarterback that DJ Moore's ever played with. Now, of course, prime Cam Newton has more talent in his left pinky toenail than you have in Baker Mayfield's entire body. However, he didn't play with good Cam Newton. He played with a very bad Cam Newton. If we look at DJ Moore's quarterback history, quarterback adjusted yards per attempt through his career in Carolina, he's had the worst quarterback play in the NFL. Sam Darnold, who was last in the NFL in adjusted yards per pass attempt last year, PJ Walker, Teddy Bridgewater, Will Grier, Kyle Allen, Taylor Heineke, Cam Newton. They've averaged 6.05 adjusted yards per pass attempt. Like Cam Newton back in his prime, like we can go through, we can look at some great Cam Newton seasons where with an adjusted yards per pass attempt, he's getting up to 7.6 in 2012. He's getting at 7.2 in 2011. But his final 3 years where DJ Moore was playing with them, 6.4, 7.2 in New England. That doesn't count. And his final year in Carolina, 5.4 adjusted yards per pass attempt. Like he didn't get to play with good Cam Newton. He played with injured Cam Newton. If you look at Baker Mayfield from an efficiency standpoint, Baker Mayfield is significantly better than Sam Darnold was. DJ Moore is still incredibly young. He just signed that contract extension in Carolina. I like DJ Moore as a very stable dynasty asset. Now, moving over, wide receiver 13, DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf's going to be ranked lower than this in redraft, but this goes back to the A.J. Brown sentiment. You're betting on talent. In the long term, you're not expecting Tyler Lockett to be there in Seattle. Maybe Dwayne Eskridge is a Lockett replacement. Hard to bet on that with certainty. And then on top of this, you're looking at a Seattle Seahawks organization that will most likely be one of the worst teams in the NFL this year and get a very high draft pick next season. We can all assume that's going to happen. And on top of it, they have an extra first round pick. They have an extra second round pick. They are going to have so many ways to go in next year's NFL draft where they'll be able to address the quarterback position if they find value. Now, of course, it's not a guarantee, but they'll be in a fine cap situation. On top of it, they should have the assets to go after a quarterback next year. So with Metcalf, he's increased his overall target share in this offense over the past 3 years. Since his rookie year, every single year goes from like 20% to 23% to 26%. Let me look at my draft guide to make sure. Yeah, 20%, 23%, 26%. Betting on the talent here with Metcalf at 13. Our next wide receiver, betting on the talent, we're looking at Drake London. With Drake London, if you look at our wide receiver prospect model, oh dear God, like this is someone that is absolutely absurd. Checks every single box we look for. The issue is the quarterback play in Atlanta. Atlanta, very similar to Seattle, going to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL. You should not expect any efficiency in this offense whatsoever. You're not going to have Drake London as the wide receiver one here. You will have the wide receiver one probably being Kyle Pitts, of course, based on what we saw Kyle Pitts' rookie season. But I love the talent of London. He had a full-time role commanding a large target share in this offense as a 17-year-old freshman. 17-year-old freshman when Michael Pittman Jr. was a 22-year-old senior. I love me some London. Now, going to our next wide receiver in this tier, we are going to have Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson, of course, everybody is off of Deontay because the quarterback change in Pittsburgh. I've been saying this for a while. Ben Roethlisberger was horrendous last year. Get that through your mind. Ben Roethlisberger was one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. If we look at veteran quarterbacks that had a lower adjusted yards per pass attempt than Ben Roethlisberger, you had Andy Dalton, Jacoby Brissett, and Sam Darnold. Those were the three guys. That is what Deontay Johnson dealt with last year. Despite that, he was the wide receiver 7 on a points per game basis, dominating with almost a 27% team target share. The only wide receivers to post a target share as high as Deontay Johnson last year, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, and DJ Moore. Maybe Pickett doesn't favor Deontay as much as Ben Roethlisberger did, but honestly, if you're going to assume that Claypool, Pickens take up a much larger role in this offense compared to what we've seen from Deontay, you're just projecting that. But what we have seen is Deontay Johnson be a target hog. I'm going to be fine having him at 15. And let's look at a wide receiver that the Dynasty community has lost their mind with. Treylon Burks. So after the NFL draft, we had Treylon Burks ranked as the 105. Now, since then, I have moved him ahead of Garrett Wilson, despite the Dynasty fantasy football community in July giving up all hope on Treylon Burks. If we go through and look at Treylon Burks at the time he was drafted to be a Tennessee Titan on keep trade cut, he got up as high as the wide receiver 14 in Dynasty. Now, of course, I was making videos saying sell high on Treylon Burks. He shouldn't be at that price point. But based on a report about asthma, a report that Nick Westbrook-Ikhine was starting, which is complete garbage. That's what coaches are supposed to say to pay respect to the veterans that have been in the building for years. He has fallen on keep trade cut as low as the wide receiver 31. Treylon Burks has been one of the weirdest examples of how the Dynasty fantasy football community will just lose their mind and take non-stories and way overreact this offseason. He went from being a sell-high player after the NFL draft based on the landing spot to now, in my opinion, one of the best buy lows you're going to find in Dynasty fantasy football. Now, let's go down another tier. Let's look at Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 17. My issue with Wilson, while I do think he's an elite level prospect, I had him ranked higher than Treylon Burks going into the NFL draft and immediately after. But looking at the inefficiency of Zach Wilson in year one, even though we've now learned that Zach Wilson is a freaking dog, we all know that, still, I am worried about the overall passing environment. I think it is going to be comparable to Drake London's situation in Atlanta. I think it's going to be comparable to Dk Metcalf's situation in Seattle. Not as bad. Not as bad. And I don't think this team is able to turn around the situation nearly as quickly. I don't want to say that you have a Blake Bortles, a Mitchell Trubisky, a Sam Darnold type situation brewing with Zach Wilson. But if you look historically, while yes, you can find the one example of Josh Allen in the past decade working out, if we look historically over the past decade, when you post a rookie season as bad as what we had from Zach Wilson, really hard to turn that ship around. Now, our next wide receiver 18, Chris Godwin. Way younger than a lot of y'all assume. I mean, Chris Godwin drafted in that same draft class as Cooper Kupp in 2017. Let me look this up. I believe Godwin going into his age 26 season. Yeah, Chris Godwin just turned 26. He will play the entire 2022 season at 26 years old. Cooper Kupp just turned 29. Cooper Kupp will turn 30 next offseason. So despite being in the same draft class, Cooper Kupp's older than Mike Evans, even though Mike Evans was drafted in 2014. Dear God, I just saw that. That's very surprising. I think that you do have a nice combination with Godwin that you can have him now for a contending team. And also, you're not just having him get phased out of Tampa immediately next year. Now, wide receiver 19, Jerry Judy. With Jerry Judy, I like his price point more in Dynasty than I do in a redraft. In Dynasty, Jerry Judy is going about on keep trade cut. Let me pull this up. He's going in a reasonable range where you are going to be able to go out there and you're going to be able to draft him in startups. You're going to be able to trade for him at a reasonable price. He's going as the wide receiver 28 in Dynasty. However, if we head over to Underdog Fantasy, which is just redraft just for this year, Jerry Judy's being drafted as a mid wide receiver 2. Jerry Judy's a wide receiver younger than Kenny Pickett. There's no reason for his redraft value to be higher than his Dynasty value. Very few players, I think, are great values in one format and horrible in another. Jerry Judy's one of those guys that I'm like, okay, yeah, it makes sense if you're expecting this overall offense to make that massive jump up. He had 1.9 yards per route run last year compared to Courtland Sutton at 1.5. We also know the splits with them, with Jerry Judy healthy, between Sutton and Judy when they're both on the field. It makes sense for Jerry Judy to get a lot better this season, but in redraft, the price is out of control. In Dynasty, it's completely affordable, very similar to Gabriel Davis. Gabriel Davis and Jerry Judy are guys that you want nothing to do with in redraft. People have gotten way too excited, but in Dynasty, they're fine values. Now, wide receiver 20, Michael Pittman Jr., I understand. With Michael Pittman Jr., you're just simply never going to be able to draft him here. He is the wide receiver 12 right now in Dynasty. Yes, I'm going to be lower on him than most. If you go ahead and if you look at my ranking of him, hell, he finishes the wide receiver 28 last season on a points per game basis. Now, he was incredibly impressive with his yards per route run of 2.1. Bravo. And he had a target share close to 25% in year 2. So I am expecting Michael Pittman Jr. to get a lot better. In redraft, I have him ranked as the wide receiver 16. Like, I'm expecting him to go from the wide receiver 84 his rookie year to the wide receiver 28 his second year to then continue to progress. My issue is I don't think Matt Ryan's nearly as large of an upgrade over Carson Wentz as a lot of people make it out to be. Prime Matt Ryan, yes, I give it to you 100%. But 37-year-old Matt Ryan, based on what we saw over the past 2 years, don't tell me, don't go down to the comment section. Please don't embarrass yourself and say, oh, Mason, Matt Ryan has supported multiple wide receiver ones before. Have you not seen what he did with Julio Jones? Listen to yourself. Julio Jones was a wide receiver 1 with Matt Ryan. Julio Jones is Julio Jones. Look what he did in college. Look at the player he was coming in the NFL. You think that was based on Matt Ryan? Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. I think you can easily move Michael Pittman Jr. up to 17 if you'd like. But our next wide receiver 21, tier below, Chris Olave. With Chris Olave, checks a lot of the boxes that we are going to be looking for. Going over to New Orleans, I think he could have a sneaky good year 1. Of course, the one issue you have with Chris Olave is his final season at Ohio State. He stayed a 4th year, which is already a red flag. Then he gets outproduced by Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith-Njigba, which, of course, if you're the wide receiver 3 in your collegiate offense, your final season, you're probably toast. But, and there's a big but on this one, Garrett Wilson's an elite level wide receiver. Jackson Smith-Njigba is even better. He would have been the wide receiver 1 ahead of Drake London in this year's class and wouldn't have been close. So it's one of the most unique situations we've ever seen with Olave. Long-term, Jarvis won't be there. We don't know if Michael Thomas will be there. I'm fine. Chris Olave at 21. Now, Terry McLaurin is going to be our guy at 22. Yes, he should have the best quarterback play of his entire NFL career with Carson Wentz. However, he'll also have the most target competition of his entire NFL career of both Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel. So I think the target share will come down. The efficiency will come up. I think it'll be about where he's been over the past 3 years. And I know people are probably going to be surprised to see this. But if I pull up Terry McLaurin in our draft guide, you're going to look at Terry McLaurin as a wide receiver that over the past 3 years has averaged the wide receiver 27 finish on a points per game basis. He's great. But he's not putting up fantasy points. Now, our next wide receiver, Hollywood Brown, wide receiver 23. We don't know about Hopkins in the long term in Arizona. And for the first 6 weeks, Hollywood Brown should be very exciting. Wide receiver 24, boring. If you're a contender, you're excited. If you're rebuilding, you have no interest. Mike Evans, very hard to rank these guys that are just pure contending assets versus pure rebuilding. Of course, it does come down to so much of your roster construction. But thank you so much for being a part of the flock. I truly appreciate all of y'all. I really hope you have a great day. And of course, if you are not having fun right now, and if you are not firing up an underdog draft, you are living your life wrong. Go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK when you sign up, and they'll match that deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. And you'll get our 2022 draft guide literally with just a $10 deposit. But thank you again. I appreciate y'all, and I hope you have a great day.